Hey friends, and welcome back to the Dinosaur channel. This is your home on the internet for all things dinosaur and prehistoric. I'm Tal, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive on a very controversial topic that has rocked the scientific world over the past years: de-extinction.
The Tasmanian tiger could be brought to life.
They are bringing the thylacine back.
Now scientists are planning to resurrect it using ancient DNA retrieval and artificial reproduction.
This really could revolutionize the way that we look at extinction.
We are righting our wrong. We drove this animal to extinction unjustly.
Scientists are currently working on undoing or reversing the extinction of certain animals that have been long gone. More specifically, in this episode, we'll be covering the Thylacine de-extinction. But before we jump into it, I want to make sure that you guys subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss any new episodes. As well, you can become a member on this channel and get some cool perks for it. It doesn't cost that much, and it goes a long way in supporting this channel, so we can keep creating the amazing content that we do here. But getting back to the main points, recently there's been a lot of talk in the scientific world, and more so in the fringe paleo-resurrectionist universe, discussing the possibilities of reviving or cloning the thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger. And as we're going to be taking such a deep dive into the ramifications of bringing this creature back to life, we should probably start with defining what it is, or actually what it was. So what is a thylacine? The thylacine was a carnivorous marsupial. Its scientific name, Thylacinus cynocephalus, which means dog-headed pouched dog, basically a marsupial that looked like a dog. Nicknames of the thylacine were the Tasmanian tiger, or if you're Aussie, the Tassie Tiger. I'm only joking, I don't know if that's actually slang in Australia. And it got that name because of its striped lower back. It's also called the Tasmanian wolf because of its dog-like features. The modern thylacine probably appeared around 2 million years ago, during the early Pleistocene. It was native to the Australian mainland and the islands of Tasmania and New Guinea, as indicated by indigenous Australian rock paintings, as well as fossil remains that were discovered in Victoria, South Australia, Western Australia, and Queensland. Thylacine was a pouched mammal like kangaroos, possums, koalas, and the Tasmanian devil. They're also known as marsupials. The thylacine resembled a large, short-haired dog with a stiff tail, which smoothly extended from the body, similar to that of a kangaroo. An adult thylacine grew up to 4.9 feet or about 1.5 meters long and stood around 2 feet or 0.6 meters tall. It also had a tail which measured almost as tall as the thylacine stood, a bit over 2 feet or 0.67 meters long. Its weight ranged from 49 pounds or 22 kilograms up to 66 pounds or 30 kilograms, and on average, adult male thylacines were larger than females. Yes, they did exhibit that sexual dimorphism. According to the Australian Museum, the thylacine was sandy yellowish brown to gray in color. It had 15 to 20 distinct dark stripes across the back from its shoulders to its tail. These stripes were more visible in younger specimens, fading as the animals got older. Its legs were relatively short and its fur was dense, short, and soft. It had short round ears that were covered with short fur. It had a large, powerful jaw with 46 sharp teeth. The thylacine was one of only 2 marsupials known to have pouches in both sexes. The other species is the water possum from Central and South America, which is still in existence today. Both male and female thylacines had back opening pouches. The female carried its young, called a joey, like the kangaroo, in its pouch for up to 3 months. The joeys were dependent on the mother until at least half grown or half adult size. And get this, as for the male thylacines, they had a pouch that served as a protective sheath covering their external reproductive organs or genitalia. Pretty interesting. It's like a furry condom. I think these thylacines were onto something. So the behavior of the Tasmanian tiger is an interesting point to me. It was the only marsupial apex predator that lived in modern times. Unlike almost all other marsupials alive today, it didn't have a diet of grass, eucalyptus leaves, or invertebrates. It was exclusively carnivorous and mostly ate flightless birds such as emus, Tasmanian native hens, and possibly now the extinct dromornithids. Dromornithids. I had a little trouble pronouncing that one. Also known as thunderbirds or demon ducks. My scriptwriter wrote this. This is the most Australian thing I've ever heard in my life. Demon ducks. Wait till they tell you about a drop bear. It's also believed that the Tassie Tiger ate small marsupials, lizards, and rodents. It was said to have been nocturnal, and it tended to retreat to the hills and forest for shelter during the day, and hunted in the open at night. It moved at a slow pace and was generally stiff in its movements. Early observers noted that this animal was typically shy and secretive, with awareness of its presence of humans and generally avoiding contact. The thylacine was also observed to threat yawn, growl, and hiss when agitated. The The thylacine was reported to have preyed on sheep and poultry. European settlers in Tasmania in the 1800s blamed thylacines for livestock losses. However, it seemed that in most cases, feral dogs and human habitat mismanagement were actually the culprits. The thylacine was thought to be a threat to the Tasmanian sheep industry, a pest, and was hunted to the point of extinction. In 1830, the Van Diemen's Land Corporation, a farming corporation in Tasmania, introduced a bounty on the thylacine. And if that wasn't bad enough for their population, later in 1888, the Tasmanian Parliament placed an official bounty of £1 for every thylacine hunted. These bounties unfortunately led to a more lethal approach to controlling the thylacine pest problem, and as the hunting efforts increased, the numbers dwindled rapidly. The thylacine was forced off of its land and finally into extinction in September of 1936. The thylacine disappeared not less than 2,000 years ago virtually everywhere except in the Australian island of Tasmania, where the last thylacine living in captivity, named Benjamin, died in 1936. The species was officially declared extinct in 1982. You know, it's kind of a bleak reflection on humanity. We managed to wipe an animal clean out of existence. Actually, it's debatable, but we'll get into this shortly. And within the span of 100 years or so, decided we fucked up and make efforts to reverse the death and destruction. Humanity has done this with countless species, and in the fascinating realm of de-extinction, we ponder the possibility of taking responsibility to bring back and correct the mistakes we made, like the extinction of the dodo bird from the island of Mauritius, which was entirely a human-caused extinction, or in the more vague causation understanding of the extinction of the woolly mammoth, woolly rhino, or multiple species of saber-toothed cats. We play with this possibility in the next most realistic jump, the de-extinction of dinosaurs via cliche bullshit articles written on social media, short YouTube videos reading headlines of said bullshit articles, or the worst, the bane of humanity, TikTok videos, usually presented by uneducated preteens trying to get clicks. And while I know I'm off on a bit of a rant here, we don't take a moment to think about these things, their impact, and what they mean for our futures. All of our futures. And while we aren't exactly cloning a T-Rex yet, I have to quote the amazing Ian Malcolm portrayed by the incredible Jeff Goldblum here, because this quote is such a beautiful foreshadowing for where we are heading. Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet has ever seen, but you wield it like a kid who's found his dad's gun. That's precisely where we are heading. And now, scientists in Australia are working on bringing back the thylacine. So let's explore that. So how is the de-extinction of the thylacine being proposed exactly? Well, earlier this year, the University of Melbourne announced the establishment of a world-class research lab. Its purposes are for de-extinction and marsupial conservation science. This is all thanks to a $5 million philanthropic gift. That donation, which came from the Wilson Family Trust, was used to establish the Thylacine Integrated Genetic Restoration Research Lab, or Tigger. We're going to be using that acronym quite a bit moving forward, so just keep it in mind, TIGGR. According to Dr. Andrew Pask, head of the Tigger Lab and professor in epigenetics in the School of Biosciences at the University of Melbourne, their aim is to develop the technologies to potentially bring back a species from extinction and help safeguard other marsupials on the brink of disappearing. Fast forward to August 2022, US-based biotech company Colossal Laboratories and Biosciences announced that it will be investing a further $10 million into the Tigger Lab. So Colossal Biosciences, which is already using genetic engineering to de-extinct the woolly mammoth, announced that it is funding its second de-extinction project with this amazing Tasmanian tiger. Colossal's goal is to reintroduce a genetically modified hybrid Tasmanian tiger, emphasis on the hybrid, within the next decade. They want to introduce this animal into parts of Australia to hunt non-native predators that prey on native herbivores in an attempt to rebalance the ecosystem. For Colossal, the thylacine played a significant role as a protector of the environmental health for the regions it's inhabited. Its role as an apex predator meant that it helped remove the weak and the sick, as well as keep the balance with competitors, helping ensure species diversity. The Tigger Lab and Colossal collaboration is not planning on resurrecting the thylacine as it was. Emphasis, as I said earlier, on the hybrid. It can't bring it back as an exact replica. They are currently in the early stages of engineering the thylacine using genetic material from dead animals and living relatives. Scientists take stem cells from a living species with similar DNA, like the fat-tailed dunnart, and turn them into thylacine cells, or the closest approximation possible. Using gene editing expertise developed by George Church, a professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School and Colossal Colossal's co-founder, the stem cells will then be engineered to make an embryo, which would then be transferred into either an artificial womb or a donor surrogate to gestate or to carry until delivery. Dr. Pask, in an interview with Australian Geographic, explained that moving forward with the collaboration, Tigger will be concentrating its efforts on establishing the reproductive technologies tailored to Australian marsupials, such as IVF or in vitro fertilization and gestation without a surrogate. They do this as Colossals simultaneously deploy their gene editing technology and computational biology capabilities to reproduce thylacine DNA. Over 10 years ago, Dr. Pask and an international team first resurrected a Tasmanian tiger gene. They did this from a preserved pelt or an animal skin with fur still on it, but the DNA was too fragmented to obtain the whole genome. After searching various museums' worldwide databases, the team found specimen C5757, a young thylacine pup in the Museum Victoria's collection in Melbourne, Australia. Because the Tasmanian tiger was a marsupial, this pup specimen could be preserved in its entirety, allowing the research team to extract DNA and use cutting-edge techniques to sequence the thylacine genome. According to Dr. Pask, the thylacine represents the highest quality extinct genome for any species to date. So now I want to jump into the science behind the Thylacine de-extinction project. Supposedly, there are 9 steps involved in bringing back the thylacine, and these are all explained by Dr. Pask. Step 1. It's decoding the thylacine genome. This is a very important step since the genome is basically a complete genetic blueprint or set of instructions on how to build a thylacine. Step 1 is already actually complete, as Dr. Pask and his team have already released this thylacine genome in 2017. Step 2 has also been completed. Dr. Pask's team now have the sequence for several species which represent the thylacine's closest relatives, which include the Dunart or marsupial mouse, Tasmanian devil, the Phascogale, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Phascogale, and the numbat. The species with the most similar DNA will provide the living cells and template genome that can then be edited to transform into a thylacine genome. Step 3 is currently a major objective of the Tigger Lab. This step is a large bioinformatics project that compares marsupial genomes to identify all the differences that would potentially need to be edited into the host genome to create a thylacine cell. Step 4 is now in development with the Tigger Lab and the Australian Research Council. This collaboration was able to derive stem cells for the model marsupial species, which is the fat-tailed Dunart, from which a lot of techniques needed for the thylacine de-extinction will be developed. Steps 5, 6, and 7 require the development of assisted reproductive technologies for marsupials, and it's in development with Tigger Lab. These techniques are also required to use living stem cells to make an embryo and then successfully transfer it into the host species' uterus. Finally, in steps 8 and 9, the baby marsupials complete their development in the pouch while suckling milk. Now, as part of the de-extinction process, the scientists will instead introduce bottle feeding to the joey from a very young age. The most controversial question about the Thylacine de-extinction project: should we bring back the thylacine? Should we really be resurrecting extinct animals, essentially playing God? We're about to go on a very long tangent, so strap in here. An article from the academic website The Conservation describes de-extinction as a highly controversial field. It's often criticized for attempts at playing God or drawing attention away from conservation of living species. They asked 5 experts for their opinion on de-extinction. According to Axel Newton, evolutionary biologist at Tigger Lab, the team has an obligation to do everything in their power to bring back the thylacine, particularly as our ancestors were the direct cause of its disappearance. However, the scientists also have an ethical and moral responsibility to ensure that the animal they resurrect is at 99% plus thylacine and not an almost thylacine hybrid. We start going into a weird territory when we start making hybrid almost animals. We're not fixing anything in that case, we're just creating more of a mess. Dr. Newton also said that the thylacine should be brought back not only for the future of this incredible lost species, but also for the significant effects that this initiative will have on humanity as a whole. We have the chance to correct the wrongs of the past, provided we maintain moral and ethical considerations at the forefront. Dr. Julian Copland, a bioethicist, also agrees to state that bringing back approximations of animals such as Tasmanian tiger or the woolly mammoth help in restoring the ecosystem they once inhabited. Another reason is to inspire humans with a sense of wonder and awe, and possibly even better respect for the natural world. He adds that perhaps the most serious ethical worry is that de-extinction is a poor use of resources. We could probably make a bigger difference to biodiversity by funding conservation efforts instead, but this objection isn't decisive. The cost of de-extinction may come down over time, maybe after a few years and a couple of successful de-extinction projects. Yuan Ritchie, wildlife ecologist, believes that there's much to consider with such an ambitious project. While scientists must greatly increase their efforts to save and recover living species, it's simply far cheaper and easier to conserve what we have than attempt to resurrect species and their ecological roles. He doubts that resurrected species will behave the same way, nor will it perform the same ecological roles and affect ecosystems in the same way it used to. Dr. Ritchie also believes that a shortage of funding for conservation isn't the issue, but the values and priorities. Dr. Ritchie said he would love to see thylacines back in the wild, but is not optimistic we'll be seeing a self-sustaining and genetically diverse population of thylacines anytime soon, if at all. If such projects are to proceed, he also hopes that indigenous people and various communities are properly consulted and involved. Parvinder Kaur, a geneticist, biotechnologist, and director of DNA Zoo Australia, says that pushing through with de-extinction projects depend on the complex risks reintroductions of extinct species would have on our current ecosystems. She believes that a better use of biotechnology should be towards preserving critically endangered species on the verge of extinction. Focus on what we have first, what we currently have. According to Dr. Kaur, focusing on de-extinction could compromise biodiversity conservation by diverting resources from preserving ecosystems and preventing newer extinctions. It is no trivial work in terms of resources and skills required to revive an extinct animal. Given the low level of investments into conservation research, we need to be very careful as a scientific community to not prioritize preservation over resurrection. And Corey Bradshaw, an ecologist, believes that scientists shouldn't be bringing back the thylacine. He explains while the scientific endeavor to demonstrate capacity to reanimate long extinct species does have some merit, claiming that the approach will counter present-day extinction rates or could be used as a conservation tool is naive. Dr. Bradshaw also says that large predators like thylacines require large home ranges to gather food, establish territories, and raise young. The reason they were driven to extinction in the first instances were due to the perceived conflict with landholders. So even if the problem of genetic diversity could be solved, the social license to re-establish a large population of predators is unlikely to be granted. BBC Wildlife also asked some conservationists to see their take on the de-extinction project. Tasmanian wildlife conservation consultant Nick Mooney describes the plan as wishful thinking and says the thylacine isn't needed, across mainland Australia at least. He said that the dingo has been found across mainland Australia for thousands of years, and because it can operate in a pack, it's actually a higher order predator than the thylacine. So with the presence of dingoes, the thylacine probably wouldn't be able to survive in the wild anyways. And a quick fact, Nick Mooney has investigated thylacine sightings for 35 years and is an acknowledged authority on the species. He says it's entirely possible 100 or more thylacines may have survived in the wild after 1936. A 2016 study published in Australia's Zoologist concludes that some may have been around through the 1940s and perhaps even later. Since then, sighting reports have continued, more than 900 since 1936 in Tasmania, and reputably a similar number from the mainland. Who knows, maybe the thylacine is still around after all, or maybe the witness saw another similar but unknown creature. There is an entire Facebook community, by the way, that just explores and discusses thylacine sightings. It's actually pretty interesting, and there's a lot of people who swear by it that the thylacine still exists. There's also been plenty of content on YouTube that I highly recommend watching that delves into trying to find thylacines in the wild. I haven't come to my own conclusions yet on whether I believe they're still out there, but it's an interesting prospect. Lastly, Jack Ashby, an Australian mammal expert and assistant director of the University Museum of Zoology at the University of Cambridge, understands the motivation of wanting to right the wrong of the thylacine's extinction. But he also says that projects like this potentially undermine current conservation efforts to save rare species, not just because valuable resources are being diverted from where they can be most effectively used. He adds that thylacines are gone due to overhunting. If we keep saying it can be resurrected, what would that do to our ability to argue against overhunting elsewhere? I have to say, I think this is kind of a stupid point. We've made mistakes in our past as a species, and just because they were killed because of overhunting doesn't give us the right to not act upon trying to correct that bad thing we've done, especially if we have the opportunity to. That's just me playing devil's advocate here. I'm not again taking an exact stance on this. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature, also known as the IUCN, developed guidelines for resurrecting species in 2016. It specifically noted that none of the methods to de-extinct species will ever produce a faithful replica. Extinction cannot be undone. The IUCN guideline document doesn't even use the word de-extinction in its title. It's called the Guiding Principles on Creating Proxies of Extinct Species for Conservation Benefit, and proposes that a proxy is a much better way to define these kinds of species scientists will resurrect. Overall, there are scientists who believe de-extinction is a worthy pursuit that will lead to new conservation technologies and improve our understanding of living species so we can better protect them today. There are those who believe de-extinction is simply a spectacle. It is seen as unethical, a misguided gimmick, and a waste of time and money. Some claim the scientists involved are doing it all for media attention and describe the work as technically impossible. Extinction is forever, they say, and nothing can change that. The real question is, how long will it actually take until we see this happen? Well, Jack Horner, the legendary paleontologist who Alan Grant from the Jurassic Park films was based on, says this: "We are a long way from being able to reconstruct the DNA of extinct creatures. We have DNA for living creatures, including ourselves, and yet we cannot clone any living animal from DNA alone. As for extinct taxa, it is unclear whether or not DNA actually can survive more than a few thousand years. No one has been able to demonstrate incontrovertibly, as of yet, that they can retrieve DNA from an extinct species." He goes on to say that even if we could get DNA from an extinct taxon, and even if we knew how to clone the DNA, we would still have another hurdle in creating the exact embryonic conditions. For example, how we would synthesize a dinosaur egg in its exact movement. However, this faraway dream won't stop Dr. Horner from achieving it. In a TED Talk from a decade ago, he explained that while he may not be able to use the exact DNA of a dinosaur to revive it into this era, he can genetically engineer their living descendants, the birds, in this case the chicken, and reactivate their ancestry. Since then, we've heard few updates about this project and they have been inconsistent at best, but we're definitely going to be making a video in the future diving into Jack Horner's Dino Chicken project, so definitely stay tuned to that. Okay, finally, let's talk about the implications of this entire project. While de-extinction can bring back other extinct animals, such as the woolly mammoth and the dodo bird, let's talk about the thylacine and delve deeper as to why the revival of this species is special and piques so much interest. What we can see from this story is one of hope and wonder. With this de-extinction technology, we have the chance to change the course of the future and history itself by reviving these awesome creatures. Besides continuing the species, the beautiful thylacine, the main benefit of reviving these animals is that there's a chance to rebalance Tasmania's ecosystem. Being an apex predator, the thylacine could take care of the island's pests and therefore lessen the spread of diseases around. It could help address the overpopulation of animals like kangaroos and wallabies. If this de-extinction process is successful, it could change life as we know it forever and make science fiction into a reality. While the revival of an extinct species has its benefits, it also has its downsides. There is much more discourse on the welfare of the subject animals, ecosystem disruption, and many more. Thankfully, experts have been advocating for this project to first consult Indigenous Australians before continuing. De-extinction can go both ways, good or bad. However, what can be concluded from the news of the technology is at the very least, appreciation is increasing towards animals like the thylacine and revealing remorse for humanity's past actions. Honestly, what I can say is that we should just hope for the best and see this as a lesson on how we can care for the living animals we have now before we have to revive them in the future. Let's prioritize what we have now before it's too late. Let the thylacine be a reminder for humanity, for us, on where our future is heading as we inch closer to becoming gods and wielding the most awesome power conceivable to us. Well, damn. What did you guys think of that one? Guys, for those of you who have been following the channel for the last year or so, this is what I've always wanted to take this channel to. I've been inspired by channels like Trey the Explainer, Edge, Alternate History Hub, Kyrgyzgat, and many more. And while we're definitely going to continue making our fun short dino quick dives, this channel has needed this deeper, more serious turn in content creation for a while. Thank you to everyone who supports us, and to our members, I appreciate you so much. Making these videos is not easy and requires a lot of time and work from an entire team. I have script writers and editors who help me bring this content to life, so please, if you appreciate it and can spare it, become a member on our channel, join, it'll go a long way in supporting us. And if you just want to throw us a donation, our PayPal link is down below in the description. I'd love to hear what topics you'd like to hear us take a deeper dive into next, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, Dino friends.